action. I can't get no call to action, but I try, and I try, and I try.
Hello and welcome to Call to Action, the go-to podcast for anyone trying to make sense of the world of marketing, advertising and beyond. In an industry that is a minefield of utter bollocks, we aim to capture our heroes and allies from the front line to have a chinwag with. It's like Pokemon Go, with the single but vital exception that it's not a short-term bandwagon of shite. It's brought to you by Gasp, and I'm Giles Edwards, co-founder and MD. Today I've caught Richard Huntington, a high-octane brand strategist with nearly 30 years' experience in advertising. Richard is chairman, chief strategy officer, and part of the furniture at Saatchi Saatchi. But look under the bonnet and you'll see the modified engine of a planner. At Saatchi, he has worked on clients including T-Mobile, the Labour Party, Marie Curie and HSBC, while previously he worked on Sky, where he helped launch Sky Plus back in 2003. The most quotable person in brand strategy, says Simon Manship. He believes in strong opinions, lightly held, runs a hugely influential advertising blog, Ad Literate, and heads the growing queue of people in love with Andy Nairn. Richard says no commercial problem is unsolvable with enough creativity, imagination and intelligence. Welcome to the show, Richard.
Giles, thank you. Thank you for that introduction.
Right, 7 quick fires.
Yes.
Mac or PC?
Always Mac.
Clear or clever?
Clear.
1984 or Animal Farm?
I'm going to say Animal Farm.
Right, singing one now. Tenor or bass?
Bass.
Ralph Fiennes or Mark Rylance?
Wow, I wonder where that's come from. I think Mark Rylance, particularly as a big friendly giant.
Yeah, I adore Mark Rylance. Sir Mark Rylance, that should be actually.
Okay, sorry.
2 more. Be interesting or be right?
Well, you know that's always be interesting in my book.
And then finally, Andy Warhol or Andy Nairn?
Andy Nairn? He's who I want to be when I grow up. He's like, we are founder members of the Andy Nairn Appreciation Society.
Amazing. Well, Richard, thank you so much for joining us, mate.
Not at all. I'm really looking forward to this, Giles.
So I think, as you know, to kick things off, we like to celebrate the sometimes linear, often not so linear route that guests take to get where they are now. So to just give us a bit of context, can you tell us what was your first ever job and then what was your first proper marketing job?
Yeah, my first job, I guess, was I was working in a nursery, not a children's nursery, a plant nursery, plumbing in an irrigation system between my O-levels, and A-levels, earning, I think, the minimum agricultural wage in 1986, which was 90p an hour, less 30p board and lodging. And I was working for my parents they gave up their careers in the early 80s and set out on their own. And so I worked. I guess I had the huge privilege, and I recognize my privilege of working for and with them in a number of roles, like lots of retail jobs I did for them, even worked as a draftsman for my mum. So that was sort of my first gentle introduction to the world of paid employment.
And then how did that lead to what we like to say proper marketing?
A proper
gig?
job.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, I don't know. I just slowly got interested in advertising. It wasn't an overnight conversion. Of course, literally nobody grows up saying, Mummy and Daddy, one day I think I'm going to go into advertising. Particularly if you grew up sort of in a sort of. I grew up in rural Somerset and Devon. I was farmer's son. It was completely outside our sort of world in terms of the sort of jobs you do. And it started to dawn on me that it might be an interesting idea, and I sailed into the milk round process, thinking I'd get my first job in advertising, and it was a really big lesson. I got I got through to first interview at lots of places, so good on paper, shit on grass, because because I got literally no second interviews, just the first interview, and and that was it. And actually, I've got so many rejection letters back in 1989 from agencies I then went on to work for, like Abbott Mead. I got a rejection letter from the legendary John Steele when he was at BMP, from Scylla Snowball when she was at Ogilvy, and of course from Saatchi Saatchi, wishing me all the best with my career. Let that be hopefully a lesson to everybody trying to get into this strange industry. I wonder where Len Barkey is now, because I'm the CSO of that agency. Anyway, so I sort of I left university sort of licking my wounds a little bit and wondering, whether where I could really cut it, to be honest. And then in the good old days, I want to take you back there when in the Guardian on a Monday, there was a thing called Media Guardian, and it had media jobs, and they were beautiful. I mean, many of them were in telesales, I know, but it was a beautiful thing wandering through Media Guardian on a Monday, and I spotted an ad in about October 1989 that said, in the year 2000, 90% of marketing will be direct marketing. And I applied to that agency. It's now defunct. It's called DDM Advertising, Direct Marketing Agency, on Westbourne Terrace near Paddington. And I got my first, I think Neil Hannon from Divine Comedy called it poorly paid job in advertising. But that was my first poorly paid job in advertising.
Wow. Did you enjoy it?
Yeah, I did. I really enjoyed it. As an account handler, that's a different story. Or it's the same story, in fact. And I think so many of your guests who do what I do started in account handling, and I think we all, to a person, end up saying that we were found out. That's literally. I'm a planner because I couldn't cut it as an account handler, but I loved it. I loved. Look, I grew up in Devon and Somerset. The minute I could get out of those places and get to London, which is where I wanted to be, I was never going back. I was introduced to the heady world of advertising, sort of. It's kind of direct marketing, but in the early 90s, direct marketing had got a new swagger to it. But I knew I wasn't quite where I really wanted to be. I'd had this sort of the smell of places like Abbott Mead when it was in Old Marylebone Road, and it's famous building. I've been to CDP when it was on the Euston Road. That's where CDP had happened in the 60s. Yeah, I've been to BMP, which still is down in Paddington, and there was a different smell. I think I wrote about this a little bit recently in Campaign about my first love affair being with agencies, all of them, and I knew that there was something. That's something I was hankering after. And one of the things I've always said about getting into the business is start anywhere, but don't get stuck somewhere you don't want to be. And after after being legendarily poor at account handling, I managed to wangle myself to going to learn to do planning at Abbott Mead in about 93, I think it was, which was just the biggest gift anybody could ever have given me. And I really didn't look back. The minute as I was inside that place, I locked the doors and refused to leave.
Amazing. Well, you did recently write then a love letter to the agency. That love that you refer to, is that something that grew over time, or was that fairly immediate then?
No, I and it's difficult for me to separate that sort of sense of what advertising felt like in the 90s from how I feel about it now. Like it's all one thing to me. And what I really wanted to say in that piece, after a year of lockdown and not being in our agencies, and was that lots of people started talking about the return to the office, when we go back to the office, going back to the office. And I didn't want to go back to an office. I don't want to go back to office. I did some work. I went in to our place in Chancery Lane in the autumn, and I wasn't going into the agency. I was going into an office, just an office, and I wanted to make this distinction between offices as places of work and agencies as sort of these mercurial, amazing environments where we don't just make great work. And to be honest, we are all making great work by hook or by crook right at the moment. But we also create places and spaces where that work can happen, where that work can be sold, where that work can be nurtured, and where the relationships that you need to create it could be looked after. And in so many ways, I do feel a little bit like, yeah, we can do this, but I'm feeling a little bit like, when the road runner runs off the edge of a cliff but keeps running for a bit. That's been me for the last year. But if I don't get back inside what I feel back inside the ad agency environment soon, I'll plummet to the ground and be dashed into a million pieces. I really believe in the agency as a place, as an environment, and I really miss it. I really miss it.
Yeah, I to be honest, I'm that metaphor right alongside you off that cliff. I've had 2 conversations in the last week, one with Ryan Woolman in Dr. Draper in Melbourne, and then earlier today with Simon Dent of Dark Horses, about how much we're all pining to be back in agencies. And I like that distinction too, about it's not an office, it's an agency.
Well, I said in the piece, like we don't have office parties. I've seen those like on the telly and stuff. We have agency parties aren't office. They're totally different. And, there's just something, I don't want, okay, maybe I'm making special pleading for advertising agencies. It's just my thing. I'm sorry. It's just my thing.
It's a good thing. No, it's a good thing. I think lots of people share that one. And so do you think then the pandemic will be the end of agencies as we know it, or just a way of kind of evolving? Let's hope it's the latter anyway.
We've learned is that we can do, which is quite extraordinary, frankly, we can do this job remotely. I don't think any of us might have predicted that. And we can do it to a very high degree of competence. If you look at what people are capable of producing at the moment. Today we're shooting in an ad in Kiev, but the agency team is in London, shooting that remotely. We've figured this out, but it isn't the same. The process of building and nurturing ideas isn't the same. We've got a little mantra at the moment. We're trying to work through how this works, but it's about, some of the work you do is heads down work. You could be anywhere for that. Some of the work you do is heads up work, where you're sort of listening and taking stuff in. That could be hybrid. And some of the work that we do, in fact, quite a lot of it, and the important stuff is heads together work. And to be honest, don't we need to be in in shouting distance of each other? I think that this crisis has convinced me of the fact that we can do this, but it's better when we do it together.
Agreed, totally agreed. I was going to lead you into just digging into briefs, the art of briefing, but to be honest, this kind of might work as a sidestep, because presumably, and I know that you quite rightly understand and talk about the significance of the brief, presumably this pandemic has represented a whole new challenge for the art of briefing, or the process of briefing.
Yeah, I mean, I find it incredible. I did a creative briefing last night, and it was super weird. And remember also, now we have, all of us have been people who've joined our agencies since the beginning of the crisis. Creative teams have joined our agencies. You're briefing people you've never met, and so much of good briefing, in a sense, is understanding the sensibilities and approaches of different creative talents. And I find that incredibly difficult to navigate, and some things are passable just shouting over Zoom, but other things, I think it does suffer. It doesn't mean to say we can't do this, but I likened it the other day as like it's like building a brick wall, but without any mortar. So you can build the wall, but it's not the same. And I'm not sure how robust it is ultimately.
Yeah, well, a lovely quote of yours is that I'm like Gandalf. I can take creatives to the edge of the Shire, but then you're on your own. So I suppose at the moment I don't know if we push the metaphor, you're leading a band of hobbits, but you've never met them.
Never met them, and you go, right, that's me done. Off you go. And I should just qualify. I mean, that's about, I think, the relationship also between strategy and creative. Like I recognize that my creativity is derivative. I'm really good at sort of saying, it could be a bit like this, or it could be a bit like that. Do you remember the work that so and so did, or like it's what I know I need, and just as I'm no account handler. That was proved to me early in my career. I also don't have any pretensions to be a creative, because what I know I need is that insane magic that then happens when I say X, and a team, creative director, ECD, whatever, comes back and says Y. Like it's the stuff that you know that your brief led to, but you couldn't possibly have predicted when you wrote it, when you were writing your little creative starters. It transcends all of that, and that's what I sort of mean by the Gandalf thing. I can show you the way, but honestly, I'm looking forward to the journey somebody goes on, because I can't get there myself.
So without them, you're just an old guy with a stick.
Literally. In so many ways, Giles.
In so many ways. I've seen your talk.
Oh no, yes. Well,
but you're right though. I mean, the thing about briefs is, I mean, you have to be so wary of absolutes in this industry, as you'll know, better than I do. But they do increase the odds of effectiveness, don't they? They increase the odds. You can produce award-winning, fantastically effective work from a shit brief, but a great brief is only going to increase those odds.
Yeah, I mean, the APG used to do this brilliant role reversal course years ago, and the central lesson you learned as a planner was they gave you a brief with no brief, and then they gave you a shit brief, and then they gave you a good brief to work on it in a sense as a role reversed as a creative. And what you learned was there's nothing better than a great brief, but no brief is better than a bad brief. And I think such an important lesson to learn early in your career as a planner is you have to add value. And I think that's true of creative briefs. It's also true of planning. We've got to recognize that amazingly effective work was produced before us and without us. So it's only if we are able to add value that we have any value.
So can we quickly touch on how you would write a brief that you love? What's the importance of a brief, whether it's the structure or its articulation?
I wonder how articulate I can actually be. I mean, the first thing I say, it's never about the structure. I think maybe Zoe mentioned this in her podcast with you. It's about the software. It's always about the software. It's what you put in. Otherwise, writing a brief is like filling out a credit card application form. There's hugely discredited human being, but there's a wonderful Eric Gill quote where he said, "First I think my think, then I draw my think," and I think that's what planners need to do with briefs: is first think your think, then go write your think. I'm not sure I can be much more helpful than that. Beyond the fact that when I first became a head of planning, I was handed the unenviable task at an agency like HHCL, which was insanely good and full of insanely good people, and told, approve the briefs. And I go, I'm woefully unable to do this. And literally, I'm head of planning of a group of planners who all think basically, and probably were, better than I am. And so I decided all I could ever do was look at a brief and go, I don't know if this is right, but I can tell you if I think it's interesting. And that's but you asked right at the beginning, interesting versus right. That's sort of what I mean. It's the only thing I can really cling on to in life, in my professional life, is I can never tell you whether anything is right, but I can tell you if I think it's interesting. And I have a basic belief that, hell, if I'm interested, maybe I get a creative team interested. If they are interested, maybe they could get a creative director interested, and then maybe we could get some consumers interested. There's a knock-on effect, but it sort of does start from, can I come up with anything interesting? Can I talk about the world or the brand or the category in a way that nobody's ever talked about it before? I mean, that's one of the reasons I know I wang on about it ad nauseum, but I still talk about the work I did on Direct Line because I think it was literally a way of shaking the Etch-a-Sketch and saying, I'm going to talk about insurance in a fundamentally different way to anything that anybody's ever said before. It's not a bad start point.
I get that, actually. So is it kind of like interesting is becomes like the hook then? Obviously,
everything I say, nobody should ever quote, and nobody should take as gospel. Like, of course, I don't purely mean you shouldn't be right, but I kind of have a belief that if it's interesting to consumers, it probably will end up being right. And if it's not right, then you'll probably find out it's shit early enough in the process. But for God's sake, start with something that you find interesting, as opposed to spending your entire time desperately trying to produce something right, because I think I can make interesting right, but not right interesting, if that makes any sense whatsoever.
Funny enough, we've only, I suppose, fairly recently given up the several-year task of creating a definitive brief template, because I've just given up. I don't think it can be done. Yeah. And then, in fact, we frequently or increasingly refer to BBH and JWT's, both their templates from, I think one of them is at least the 60s, if not prior, and JWT's, I believe, is mid-70s, because it's it's good enough. Like, we can't improve that.
Well, I think there's absolute truth in that. I don't think you necessarily get different results because you've got a different creative briefing template. I think it's one of the things that newly made heads of planning or CSOs do to kind of pass the time. And I'm not sure. Like, I almost think I used to believe, not sure I do any longer, but I used to believe in just having a naked brief. Like, write the brief you need to write to get the work you want out. And I realize that that's not terribly helpful, particularly if you're growing up in this industry. I do hear you on. I used to love BBH briefs where they were landscape and they had a massive red box in the middle of it where you put the proposition. It was super clear what was important on that piece of paper.
I think for me personally, the reason I like, especially the BBH one that we reference, is because one or two of the lines, especially the one that forces you to make decisions and forces you into actually articulating a problem, or describing the problem at least, is what's the one most important thing that this should convey, this piece of work. And that's kind of, I suppose, without wanting to beat up people who might write lazy briefs or pretty poor briefs, I guess I've seen them as a vehicle to pass problems on to creative departments and not a means to get great effective work. Sometimes it's just a convenient way of passing a problem.
Totally, and that's the problem we need to stare at, not what is the briefing template.
Yeah, exactly. You gave an interview recently on Google Firestarters, and you mentioned your interest in the distinction between selling and salesmanship. Can you expand a bit on that and explain what you mean by that?
Sort of. I wish I could expand. If I could expand much more, I'd write a book about it. I think I wrote a piece that came out this week as well about the lost art of salesmanship. It's just sort of responding to what Paul Felwick's written a lot about, both in The Anatomy of Humbug and his most recent book, about the importance of that we come from a tradition of P.T. Barnum and showmanship and what we call at Saatchi chutzpah. That's our tradition. It's not the spreadsheet or activism. And I suppose I think that the art, and I hate the fact it's gendered, but I can't find a better word at the moment. But the act of salesmanship is everything. It's a process. It's an art form. It's a whole journey you take somebody on. Whereas I think in lots of ways, selling has been reduced to find people showing data signals that indicate they're interested and in market for a product I want to sell, and then serve them the product in a straightforward, rational way. And I think that's selling. Salesmanship is, I know it's difficult to conjure this up without sort of feeling a little bit doorstop salesman, although let's face it, David Ogilvy started as a Arga salesman. But it is a sort of, that it starts with good morning, like you don't know me, but that's why I'm sort of trying to grasp or grapple with, and I haven't managed to fully articulate. And maybe it's bollocks. I will never be able to fully articulate.
I don't know. I think there's parallels with. Like the IPA will talk about the logic and the magic side, the two different distinct sides of our industry, and maybe there's a bit more logic in the selling side. As you said, it's about those data signals and rational processes, whereas salesmanship can be quite magical. And your example there with David Ogilvy is exactly that. It's that kind of flourish that comes with it.
Yeah, and I think that the great art in our business is what you do out of market. How on earth do you get people interested in what you've got to say as a brand when they're not in market for a mobile phone contract or for car insurance or anything that you anything you might want to sell them ultimately? How do you wait? Do you wait until they go, they signal to the world that they're ready to buy, or is there validity in spending time when people are out of market, saying hello and establishing the basis upon which people might then move to purchase, or certainly prefer you when they go into that sort of evaluation process?
I always also quite like the attention you might give to someone who will never be in your target segment. So it's quite a crude example, but say Aston Martin. I can't afford an Aston Martin, and let's just assume, although I will dream that I'll never own one or be able to purchase one, but the fact I know Aston Martin and it has that kind of prestige and allure is surely one of the reasons why people who can afford it will want to buy one.
Completely. And there's so many things that spin off my head. Clearly Elon Musk is minted because the collapse in the cost of batteries, but really his genius in lots of ways was sell electric cars by making rich people want them, because then everybody will want them, rather than the sort of strange little electric cars that everybody else is making. That makes me that spins off. There's also, I mean, you're an Aston Martin man. For me, I'm thinking a bit more about Skoda. But one of the great things that Fallon did with Skoda was to diffuse the joke. So that campaign, "It's a Skoda Honest," wasn't about selling Skoda to Skoda drivers. It was diffusing the joke so that non-Skoda drivers lightened the fuck up. And so I totally. I mean, I think there's a big conversation to be had. It is being had about the sheer power of wastage. And after all, isn't that what Rory Sutherland says a brilliant thing every 5 minutes? But one of the things that totally sticks with me is advertising is expensive and difficult, because if it wasn't expensive and difficult, it wouldn't be advertising. And I think what he means by that is it's an overwhelming show of confidence and in your own business product and future to go to all that effort. And so I think that whole nexus of people talk about hyper personalized advertising. I think I'm also really interested in hyper public advertising, the way that advertising works, because I've seen that communication, but I also know that you've seen it, and I've seen it. Like, there's something, I think that probably boils down to something around social proof, and the herd effect that Mark talks about, but it's not a purely one-to-one. That's important, but it's not a purely one-to-one endeavor, this selling thing.
No, I totally agree. I my favorite example, actually, which is one of Rory's about hyper public versus hyper personalized, is when we get married, we say our vows in public spaces, often in front of all of our friends and families. We don't go door to door. And it's exactly that. That kind of signaling that you're referring to is exactly right, and it's so and it is so significant.
Yeah.
I'm just gonna read something, actually, that you might. I'd be interested to hear what your thoughts are on it, because it's a selling technique from IT, and I've nicked this already for a talk that I did a couple of weeks ago, which is, I've recently heard about someone from the IT industry who was asked to sit in on several ad agency presentations. He thought they were brilliant. The slides, the stagecraft, the quality of the argument was higher than anything he'd seen in his own industry. But he added, "You ad guys all make a terrible basic mistake. You sold positives. In IT, only in the direst cases would you ever sell a solution by detailing the benefits. We sell on fear. If you don't buy this solution, the following bad things will happen."
I mean, it does. I've got closer and closer to consultancies recently, working really closely with Sapient, because they're part of our group, and it's interesting because when they pitch, that essentially what they're saying is spend this amount of money and make this amount of money. There's a certainty to what consultancies are able to do, whereas we sort of go, do this and hopefully something amazing will happen. Because the reality is, I can't tell you at that point whether you're going to get, I believe in the work, and I probably spent some time evaluating the work, but I can't tell you whether you're going to have a reasonable success with that work, or you're going to have something transcendent, like a Cadbury's gorilla, or an idea, that a 1 in 10,000 idea that completely rewires how a category is sold. And so, but I think that's, honestly, I'm bored of craving the lives of other professional services businesses. I do think there's a little bit in it. I sometimes talk to clients when doing sort of creative training or how to respond to creative work. And I do think we could be better at spelling out the opportunity cost of not backing an idea. And I mentioned it a little bit before, but I think imagine you were the client that had done the absolutely eminently sensible thing, which was to turn down the creative idea of having a gangland fixer as a brand spokesperson for an insurance company. And I think, nobody would have a problem with you doing that. It's an eminently sensible thing to do. This is a clinically insane act. And yet in that moment, you just waved goodbye to millions and millions of pounds of commercial effect that I can't predict in that moment. But I think that there is I'd say it's more like there's a downside of not picking the brilliant ideas, because you cost your organization untold amounts of value. And we're not good enough at spelling that out, that the really risky thing is not doing the risky thing.
Totally agree. I'm wary of running out of time before our listener questions and our poses to close. But before we move there, I loved your recent blog post, Singing Eats Strategy for Breakfast. And you say, my singing story is the single most influential thing I have ever done. But I couldn't find what your singing story was, and I'm dying to know it. Would you kindly share?
Yeah, hopefully I can do this, not the extended version, because it is quite important to me. I can't sing. I've never been able to sing. I don't think I can sing. I have this horrible thing of I love music, but I can't make the sound that comes out of my mouth, whether I'm whistling, humming, or singing, sound like what's going in to my ears. And so I've written myself out of singing, as so many people have. And then I trucked up at the Do Lectures, David Hyatt's thing in West Wales, after a really bad beginning of 2018. I was at a bit of low ebb, and I just wanted brain food and stimulation and warmth and vulnerability and all those amazing things. And I signed up in an act of sort of almost like, fuck it, what's the worst can happen, to a singing workshop with an amazing vocal leader called James Sills. And I did this workshop, and at the end of it, as a choir, we'd created a piece of music, sung a piece of music that didn't sound, it sounded like music. Like I couldn't understand how that could happen. And I loved it. And I love loads of things about it. I love the fact that, you asked tenor or bass. That's a massive thing for me, because when I went into that choir environment, I thought, well, I'm not a blokey bloke. I'm not alpha male. I'm obviously going to be a tenor, and I'm not. I just happen to have a voice that's a bass, and it was really interesting, kind of a discovery about my masculinity, and it was also really interesting to start to as a man to contribute your voice, to contribute yourself in a way that's entirely submissive and about contributing to the whole, and where your voice is important and valued, because as a man you can make sounds that women can't make, and vice versa. So I loved all of that, and I came running back from the Do Lectures in a really irritating way, and I told my wife, and she said, yeah. Then I played her the recording, and she went, that actually does sound like music. And so I made her join. We went off, joined a choir. I made her to join a choir. Told my mum about it. My mum had been told when she was 16, you can't sing. There's no way you can sing. You sound awful. She stopped singing. She joined a choir. My wife's mum joined a choir. My brother joined it. Like, it had this ripple effect. So that's what I mean by it's probably the single most influential thing I've ever done. But and I'm not saying go join a choir, although I am saying go join a choir.
Yeah.
because everybody can sing. It's the most amazing experience. And the reality is, if you don't go to the gym for 30 years, you won't be that fit. And if you don't sing, which you haven't done since you were 7, it's not surprising that you're not amazing at it. You will be. You have a voice. Go find it, because for one thing, I'm just going to wrap up the rant. There's so much more I can say about this, but for one thing, it's the most. If you work in an industry like ours, which we say is about teamwork, but in the final instance, it's about you standing up and performing and showing the world that you're individually brilliant. You're part of a team. You contribute to a solution. You're individually brilliant. It is so lovely to be in an environment where it's not about you. It's nobody can actually hear the thing that you're adding into the 40 voices, and to subsume yourself into the collective is such bliss if you work in an industry like ours. End of rant.
Yeah, that was wonderful.
Join the choir, Giles. Join the choir.
Yeah. Oh, I don't know, mate.
And don't have singing lessons, by the way. That's my tip. Don't have singing lessons. Join the choir first. Then, if you want, have singing lessons. It's a mistake lots of people make. You just go and sit and mouth along if you have to. That's how you'll pick it up.
Oh, I'm pleased I asked. That was awesome. I love that. Really cool. And so presumably you still do this. I mean, this was only 3 years ago, so you must still.
Yeah. I mean, I joined a community choir, and there's a community choir near you. There aren't auditions for community choirs. You rock up. People really want you. They really want your voice. They really want you to be part of that family. I stayed in contact with this amazing guy, James Sills. Had him. We do a thing now in lockdown called Saatchi Sing, where we get together and we sing it, but we learn a song. We do it on Zoom. It's amazing on Zoom because nobody can hear you, but we put something together and we sort of perform it. I sort of been doing that because I think it's an amazing way to help keep our cultures together. I can't wait to do it live. And then it's been weird, but my choir at the moment runs on Zoom. It's not amazing to do it that way, but it's interesting, and it's one of those many things that we've figured out how to do over the last year. It just about works. So and I want to start a hashtag called strategists that sing, because I keep finding them like in little corners. Nobody admits to this, by the way.
You should recruit.
I think the other thing, sorry, but I'm a big fan of weird shit. One of the things I love is when you learn a song, you develop a new interest in it or a new respect for it. So lots of songs I kind of like. We learned a medley from West Side Story. I just think, West Side Story is such lame music. If you get into, just doing Les Miserables, right? You get into that, and you start to learn it. You start to love music, and it rediscovers music that you don't like or thinks cliched, or just surrounds you in a sort of muzak ersatz way. I don't know. It's a really interesting journey. I really will stop there.
No, that's interesting. That's really interesting, especially finding music that previously you may not have appreciated in the same way. Maybe I don't know. Maybe indulging in it from a different angle, different viewpoint, and actually being responsible for it gives you a different view.
Yeah, and it's interesting how it can be so poignant. I mean, we managed to sneak in a concert during lockdown, that brief window we had in December, and we sang "Merry Christmas, the War Is Over" by John Lennon and Yoko Ono, which I love, but I really fucking struggled to sing it because it when you're talking about next year and you're hoping it's a good one without any fear. I mean, it's really weird the way that songs can bring new emotion and new meaning. I don't know if there's a broader lesson for what we do in our day jobs, but I really recommend it.
Have you got a favourite song to sing?
Well, I said the very first Christmas I had this thing where I wanted to sing to my family, and I learned and sang Edelweiss from Sound of Music. Christopher Plummer, who sang it in the original film, died recently, and it's a lovely song to sing for as a sort of bass or a baritone. So I really like that. But at the moment, I am bloody loving. Can you hear the people? Anyway, I won't pretend I'm Les Miserables. Like, particularly in a world right now. Maybe we'll get onto this if we have any more time, where our rights are being ripped away from us, where protest is being stamped on, where we witness scenes where women. Honoring somebody going about her business, get brutalized by the police, where people protesting about the attempt to stop us protesting get discriminated against and brutalized. There's something about singing the medley from Les Miserables. I think you'll find it strangely political all of a sudden.
Yeah.
Sorry, Giles. There's not enough politics in Call to Action. I've just got to say.
It's time. Right. I'm going to go to listener questions then.
Yeah.
Asking the general public for their opinion, be it on Brexit or boat names, is notoriously fraught with danger, as is talking about singing with Richard. Joe says, you mentioned in your brilliant 7 Deadly Sins of Planning talk that gluttony in planning comes from overindulging in our own echo chamber. What advice can you give to planners on how to break out of this chamber?
Break out of this chamber. I mean, you've said on a number of occasions, Giles, you wish that there was an algorithm for randomness, and I Zoe had a very clear point of view about the user experience, but I do think it is beholden on us to try and get out of it. I would make a little stout defense of strategy Twitter. I think it can be an amazing place. I heard a planner a little while ago who said to me, I just love this story, that whenever he went to an airport or railway station on a journey, he'd buy the magazine he wanted to buy, then he'd buy a completely random magazine off the shelf and get stuck into it and I think just
That's amazing.
But it's such a good idea. Like, it might be about, I don't know, show jumping or nursing or, angling. I don't know, something you don't do yourself or even appreciate. But that randomness, that I think, and you've talked about this also, an ability to empathize with the world, with the lives of people that you don't necessarily share, I think is one of our key skills, and just exercising that muscle. And also, it also tells you you're a planner, doesn't it? If you get really, really interested in some arcane thing that you would never come across before, like singing, Giles.
I love that. I'm going to start buying random magazines.
Do that. Random magazines.
Yeah.
I think it sort of almost has to be like, I'm not sure you can do it on the internet. I think you almost have to be in that moment where you're going on a journey and you're able to read cover to cover, like, a magazine dedicated to dog grooming or whatever.
Yeah, and then you're stuck with the magazine for that journey. I think the context is
and then people look at you really
right?
oddly and go,
yeah. Or you might find an ally, another reader.
Not the planner doing the same thing.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, you're back to square one.
Yeah.
I was on a podcast a couple of years ago and I said something and someone really liked it and posted it on LinkedIn recently. My mind has this habit of creating Venn diagrams to try and understand things. And I said something along the lines of a great account man, if you can picture two circles with a slight overlap, and one what the client wants and the other is what the agency wants. And it's kind of making sure that you find that ground. And it's not about choosing one over the other. It's more about understanding the significance of empathy and making sure that if an agencies typically will be making recommendations, but ultimately there is a whole process in itself of selling that into a client and making sure the client then wants it too.
That's one of the essential arts of the account handler. And it is about, and I mean, it sounds a little bit like make sure that what the client wants is what the agency wants to make. But I think, at its heart is great agency client relationships are built on a shared agenda where you may argue tooth and nail about how you get there, but you're both going in the same direction. I think the other thing that people don't always really understand properly is the journey that a client then has to go on internally, and to make the most challenging work. The real job isn't us recommending it. It's the client then taking it through their organization intact and with some faith.
Yeah. And there's a whole chain, isn't there, that sometimes you can forget.
I don't think we always empathize, and of course, great account handlers do understand those steps and what you need to provide and the reassurance you need to provide to get there, because in the final instance it's hard to bully anybody into doing something, and actually I think one of the great advantages or great values planners have in that process is that because we're known to persuade and not sell, we can be super useful in sometimes building some of the furniture around an idea that helps a client take it through the choppy waters internally.
Yeah. That's a really nice way to put it. The final part then of our interview is the 4 pertinent poses, Richard. Starting with, what advice would you give to your younger self?
Yeah, so I think it's probably going to boil down to something like, "You're an introvert, Richard. Get over it." Because I think for such a long time, I tried to pretend I was an extrovert in an extrovert's business, and I'm not. And it's taken me a long time to be able to look my Myers-Briggs in the face, and realize who I am and what I am, and be comfortable with that, and realizing what a lot of things I'm doing are coping, really good coping. I mean, like not detrimental to me and my mental health, like good ways of showing up in the world as an introvert. But I wish I'd known that. I wish I'd understood that about myself earlier.
Yeah. Do you think you could have understood that about yourself earlier?
I think in so many ways, it's not who I wanted to be. It's not who I had in my mind's eye, and it's not what I thought about the business. To be honest, I liked all that, as I've called it, the showmanship. I mean, I think, I've developed a way of engaging in performance and showmanship, which is 100% an introvert's way of doing it. And if anybody, like, I've got so many tools and tips and things to say about navigating this world, because we are up against a whole lot of extroverts who've built a business that works for them.
Yeah. Awesome. I might get you to share some of that. Number 2, if you could banish one thing from the industry, what would it be and why?
Yeah, I think I'm going to say lack of care. I wrote something, I think came out yesterday, about too many people in advertising don't care about advertising. Because why would you? It's such a trivial, kind of disposable thing. It's not serious. It's not, what your parents thought was a proper career. It's not what many of your mates think's a proper career. And so I called it the cultural cringe that in advertising, where half the people want to be social activists, and half the people want to be management consultants. And I think the problem with that is, if you've got any industry where people don't truly care about what they do and the power of what they do, it goes wrong. And what I witness about advertising is, it doesn't really go wrong because we're an evil bunch of people, deliberately trying to do harm in the world. It goes wrong because not enough people care about what they're doing and the impact it has. If we've made work for decades that's excluded huge swathes of our population and our communities and our society, we never set out to do that, but it's what we did. So with the sole exception of people who are selling vaping products right now, who clearly think that doing harm is a good idea, I think it's about, we need to care more about what it is we do and the consequences of what we do. Doesn't mean to say, you do need to find your sort of moral compass through an industry which is essentially, part of a capitalist system. But I do think it's possible to care about what you make and the impact it has. And I think a lack of care is the one thing I'd love to banish.
Well said. Well said. Number 3, any books that you can recommend to our listeners?
Oh, see, now we're now going to do a singing rant, but not about singing. So I think if I give you 4, maybe you won't read any of them. So I'm going to suggest one single book, and maybe people will go, okay, fuck it, I'll go and see what that's all about. So you may hate this, but it's Waterlogged by Roger Deakin. Roger Deakin was an environmentalist, nature writer, but also pretty much the founder of wild swimming movement in the UK. And in 1997, he set off across Britain, essentially swam his way. It literally, if there's anything wet, Roger got his swimming trunks out of the boot of his Volvo and went and swam in it. And I think so much the sort of godfather of wild swimming, which is becoming increasingly popular. It's about us taking back our rivers. And it's a book which has got this unique combination for me of, it's a challenge, like he set out on this challenge. It's about history and actually how swimming in this country was wild swimming, in the way that I went to Canada a couple of years ago. There's wild swimming everywhere in Canada. Like we've lost this part of our culture. He's one of the finest, most beautiful nature writers. He brings this love of British countryside onto the page. And there's a good dose of politics, because at the heart of this is the fact that you have no rights of access to your rivers except if they are navigable. And the very fact that it is possible for somebody to own a river, which is basically water that comes from the sky and goes to the sea, but people think they own it, I think is one of the greatest anathemas in and I think dispelling that is the heart of the whole land reform movement. I'm sorry, because that's me going off on one, but all I really mean is that's a beautiful book. I'll take you to a million places, and I really would love you to go away. It's my blankie, basically. If my life is good, bad, or indifferent, I always turn to Roger Deakin.
Amazing. No, I love that. To be honest, I'd never even considered it like that way. I'd never had it framed to me that way about the ownership of the water, but you're absolutely right. And it's called Waterlogged.
It's called Waterlog. Lovely pun, play on words, Waterlog. But yeah, I mean, there's been a massive victory recently in the River Wharfe in Ilkley, where it's the first stretch of river in the United Kingdom which has been designated as official bathing water, and therefore has to be, in the way that our beaches are all have to be clean. This piece of water has to be clean, and we need to get back to a culture in which, particularly with the experience of lockdown last year, of where our rivers, our river, cue lots of anglers being very upset.
Yeah, that's true.
The water quality that's good for swimmers is good for trout. That's all I'd say.
Ah, right. There you go. You've already thought of the defence. I love it.
So, but what I'm really saying there is if go just like, I like the randomness. I mean, wild swimming's now become part of my thing, but I love just diving into weird, unusual places, and there's a thing my wife introduced me to, which is called sort of book archaeology, which is you read a book, and that book, like I read Waterlogged and then I read Tarka the Otter, because a book will feed you more books, and then you can go on this like long journey. Maybe you should just spend a year where all you do is read things that a previous book suggests you read, and you go back in time necessarily through this archaeology of writing. Anyway.
Yeah, I love that idea. And then, so number 4, we always dedicate every episode to someone, and we bestow that honour to our guest, who has to give their reason why. So would you kindly dedicate this episode?
Yeah, I'd love to dedicate this episode to a woman called Marie Benton. She's the CEO and founder of an organisation called, wait for it, Choir with No Name. So it's about singing. Choir with No Name it operates in 4 cities in Britain, and it's they're choirs for people experiencing homelessness and marginalisation. And they do she's done an extraordinary thing. I mean, because it's kind of weird. The thing I'm going to do in the world of homelessness and marginalisation is have people sing together. And yet the evidence suggests that coming together, that sense of family, being a singer and not marked by your life experience, is transformative for people. And I do anything I can at the moment to point a little light on what Marie has done and continues to do, and has been able to do during lockdown, where, for me, not singing in a choir and having to do it on Zoom was annoying. But this in very Choir with No Name is a source of family for so many people. So that's who it's dedicated to, if that's okay.
That's incredible. It's more than okay. Well, this is very, very proudly dedicated to Marie Benton and Choir with No Name. That's wonderful.
Thank you.
As a final call to action, everyone can head over to this episode for links to everything we've discussed. How else can people get more Richard Huntington?
I'm really not sure that they should have any more, but everything I've ever thought about pretty much is on adliterate.com. I've been running that blog for 16 years, and to be honest, I don't understand why more people don't blog, because basically it's like outsource. As I get older, it outsources my memory, so there's just somewhere where my memory exists, and I can look at it and sometimes go, oh, that's quite good back then, wasn't I? So there's that. There's me on Twitter, which is a blend of sometimes helpful and useful, and sometimes just me being angry about the world around me. That's adliterate.com. I sort of created this I mean, maybe we're in another time, in another place, Giles will talk about coping strategies for being an introvert. One of them was create an alter ego to a certain extent. And it's a bit weird calling yourself ad literate, but it comes from basically doing that. That's how to get more of me. Or like email me my personal email, my work emails on ad literate. Yeah, it's really easy.
Well, thank you for joining us. Thank you for giving us By Random magazines. Thank you for giving us Choir with No Name, for sharing your singing story, for talking about outsourcing your memory. It's been awesome. It's been absolutely awesome, Richard. Thank you,
Giles. I really, really appreciate the opportunity.
Finally, thank you to everyone listening. If you've enjoyed this, please do share it and review the pod. Keep questions and guest requests coming in. To get in touch, it's easy to find Gasp online. You can check out CTA Pod on Instagram or just email hello@calltoaction.co.
I can't get no call to action. I can't get no call to action, but I try, and I try, and I try, and I try. I can't get no call to action. Oh, I can't get no call to action. Yeah.